unquote. Is that an issue?
Look, I don't know. When these issues of tests and the bureaucracy come up, you just never know what to believe. What I do know is this, that when you build big 4-lane highways with median barriers down them, it's a hell of a lot safer than winding 2-lane roads with the occasional double lane so people can overtake. And it's ridiculous for Twyford to say that the money the national government spent on building those big highways shouldn't have been spent, because they are safer. The biggest jump in road safety that occurred in New Zealand was when we started using median barriers. It was nothing to do with speed limits, nothing to do with driver behaviour. It's simply managing the cars on the roads. And if we have new highways with median barriers on them, we will have safer roads. End of story.
Which is kind of what they're doing, though, aren't they?
No, they're not, because they're not building the roads. They've taken away all those major projects and said, oh no, we've got to have cycle lanes.
Michelle,
No, it's true.
Come on.
They are not building, they've taken away the major road projects. I thought you were going to cut me off there because you didn't agree with me.
Never cut you off. We'll keep you going forever. But look, I'm just looking at the 870 k's of high volume, high risk state highways that'll be safer by 21. You've got improvements like median barriers, side barriers, you've got rumble strips, you've got fixing dangerous corners, you've got installing roadside median safety barrier, shoulder widening, improving skid resistance. All of this is part of this massive $1.5 billion package that they announced
Yeah, that's fine.
a year ago.
That's fine, but that's not going to fix every 2-lane winding road that goes up and down hills between here and Northland, which is where people have accidents because there's only 2 lanes. They get stuck behind a truck and they overtake when they shouldn't.
I think there's a mentality attitude here that's got to change too. That the mentality seems to be at the moment, look, for various reasons, we've got these narrow winding roads that are difficult. People will drive to the conditions. The problem is you've got cars today that are more powerful, they've got more capacity to adjust to various road conditions, and an expectation in the public mind that they can get from A to B more rapidly. So I just don't think sort of relying on the fact that because the road is difficult you'll drive to the conditions is realistic anymore.
Do you both think...
need to actually improve the circumstances of those roads.
Wider ending note, do you feel that New Zealand roads are safe? Do you get a sense that they're safe? What do you reckon, Peter?
By and large, but I see some appalling behaviour on the roads from people. Passing in, blind corners, people who aren't just doing 10k over the speed limit, which I think is probably immaterial, but doing 20, 30, 40k over the speed limit.
Michelle,
Yeah, look, I was driven back from Whangarei last night, very late. It was dark for the whole trip. Fortunately, I wasn't driving, but I didn't feel unsafe, but I was with a really good driver who I knew would not take silly risks in a good car that had the capacity to speed up if it needed to when it was in trouble by someone doing something silly on the roads. So I don't think the problem is there are some roads that are not safe enough, clearly, but I think Peter's right. Driver behaviour is a bigger problem than the roads themselves.
And what a panel it's been. Michelle Bogue and Peter Dunn, thank you very much for being with me on Friday afternoon. It's been a real pleasure. And thank you to Emile Donovan for putting the week together. I'm Wallace Chapman. See you 3:45 Monday.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, are mass-produced prefab houses the answer to our accommodation crisis? The government takes the bandsaw to red tape. A super typhoon's not the only thing brewing at the Rugby World Cup. Italy kicks up over its canned match. And is Scotland looking to tackle any further game cancellations in court? A selfless, humble man who achieved more in a year than some do in a lifetime. The tributes flow for cancer care campaigner Blair, who died today. Nearly 2 years after being taken off the charities register, Destiny Church still has its tax-free status. Why? And claims the Dunedin flat party culture's revved up in response to the fun police clamping down on student pubs and bars.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. A man stabbed 6 times in a violent dairy robbery has told a court he will feel the effects of the attack for the rest of his life. Siddhartha Patel and his mother Geeta were stabbed by a teenager while working at Greylands Highlight Dairy last year. Ngātama Kaienua was jailed for 14 years in the High Court at Auckland today for his role as lookout during the attack. Mr Patel was stabbed in the head, shoulder and stomach and had to undergo several operations. After reading his victim impact statement, Justice Galt said the man would feel the effects of the attack for the rest of his life.
He felt helpless and was stressed because his family was finding it hard both to run the dairy and visit him. He is now back at the dairy but finds it difficult to work at night. He said what they did that day and its consequences for him personally will affect the rest of his life.
Justice Galt jailed Kaienua for 14 years but did not impose a minimum non-parole period. The government has unveiled a raft of changes to building laws that it says will make it easier for companies to mass-produce prefab homes. The Building and Construction Minister Jenny Salesa announced the streamlined rules in Auckland today. Katie Scotcher reports.
Jenny Salesa says the changes will enable the mass factory production of insulated homes and halve the likely number of building inspections. They will also ensure only the location where a prefab house is installed requires a building consent, removing the need for 2 separate consents. The Building Act changes will also introduce minimum requirements for information about building products and clearer roles and responsibilities for manufacturers, suppliers and builders. Jenny Salesa says the changes to the Act should have happened years ago and could have helped Kiwi build if they were implemented sooner. Call Katie Scotcher aho.
Winston Peters has lambasted the emergence of Christopher Luxon as a potential National Party candidate, saying it's an indictment on the current leadership. Mr Luxon, the former Air New Zealand chief, has announced he would like to stand for National in the Auckland electorate of Botany next year. And he's won an early endorsement from the former Prime Minister, Sir John Key. The New Zealand First leader, Winston Peters, says it's appalling that Mr Luxon is being parachuted in as a leader in waiting.
The old National Party would have thought that was sacrilegious and downright bad manners.
Winston Peters says it's corrosive for a former leader to poke his nose back into politics and try direct Nationals decisions. The All Blacks are preparing to hunker down as Tokyo gets ready for Typhoon Hagibis making landfall tomorrow. Residents are being urged to prepare as the typhoon is set to hit Japan's main island on Saturday afternoon, bringing torrential rains, high winds and storm surges. The All Black game against Italy on Saturday has been cancelled, along with a match between England and France due to the typhoon. Japan Airlines has cancelled almost all domestic flights into Tokyo's airports, and rail authorities are cancelling all trains. The All Blacks held a training session today, but will move hotels from Tokyo Bay back into the centre of the city tonight. And fullback Ben Smith says they won't be leaving the premises.
It's probably a bit of the unknown. We're sort of same as you, not too sure about these typhoons, but just I suppose the talk is just about bunkering down tomorrow and seeing what happens.
All Black Ben Smith. The US President says he faces 3 options following the Turkish attack on Kurdish fighters in northern Syria. Donald Trump tweeted he could intervene militarily, threaten sanctions or lead a mediation effort between Turkey and the Kurds. He's told journalists he prefers the mediation. Bipartisan efforts are getting underway in Congress to introduce legislation threatening sanctions against Turkey. Here's the BBC's Chris Buckler.
We are seeing a hardening of language here in Washington, which is partly because we are seeing many people inside Congress, including members of President Trump's own Republican Party, saying they must be harder on all of this. There has been a State Department briefing, and in it they have been trying to draw out the red lines that they will not tolerate when it comes to Turkey. But it gives you a sense of the concern when I tell you that those red lines include ethnic cleansing and any indiscriminate strikes on civilian populations.
Chris Buckler in Washington. The Mayor of Southland has described cancer care reform advocate Blair Vining as a dedicated and caring man. Mr Vining died today, aged 39. He had campaigned for better care for cancer patients and organised a petition for a national cancer agency which gained 140,000 signatures. Southland Mayor Gary Tong offered his condolences to Mr Vining's family and friends.
So many New Zealanders' thoughts will be with Missy and the family at this time. Blair and the family have fought a courageous battle. Blair's fought a courageous battle with his illness, and let's not stop that battle. We've got to end this type of suffering.
Gary Tong. Mr Vining is survived by his wife Melissa and 2 daughters, Della May and Lily. It's coming up to 5:05. New Zealand's best basketballer has shown no mercy against the Breakers. Stephen Adams has scored 19 points in just 19 minutes on court to lead NBA team, the Oklahoma City Thunder, to a 26-point victory in Oklahoma City this afternoon. Adams also had 10 rebounds as the Breakers finished their Australian NBL pre-season with the 110-84 loss. Rob Lowe led the Breakers with 19 points, while star recruit RJ Hampton had his second disappointing game, managing just 8 points. For the second time in as many days, the New Zealand Supercars driver Scott McLaughlin has set a lap record in practice for the Bathurst 1000. In an ominous warning ahead of qualifying, the championship leader has again topped the timesheets. McLaughlin has gone almost a third of a second faster than his record-breaking effort yesterday, with fellow Kiwi Andre Heimgartner second fastest. Things haven't gone so well for 7-time series champion Jamie Wincup, who hit the wall trying to avoid a crash. And the New Zealand squash player Paul Cole has been beaten in the quarterfinals at the US Open. The Kiwi world number 5 has gone down to defending champion and world number 2 Mohammed Al Shabagi of Egypt in 3 games in Philadelphia. Cole lost 2 gruelling opening games before losing the third 11-5 to fall to defeat in exactly 1 hour of play. His next tournament is the Egyptian Open later this month in Cairo. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, a norwesterly wind blows through the latest edition of Country Life. The plot is thickening in episode 3 of our true crime podcast, Killjoy. It's not the only thing that's thick. And because this week's element, bismuth, comes in handy if you have a runny tummy, we have a sonic tonic dedicated to diarrhea and other stomach ailments. On Nights, it's dinner music for people who aren't very hungry. With me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Wellington, including Taumaranui, Taihape, also wide at upper. Fine spells, isolated showers with some heavy rain in the evening. Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Rain with heavy falls in Bay of Plenty, easing to isolated showers from the west and south. Some heavy showers tonight. Marlborough, Nelson and Buller, fine spells and a few showers. Heavy about the ranges tomorrow afternoon and evening. For Westland and Fiordland, rain tonight, possibly heavy in Westland, then showers tomorrow. Canterbury, scattered showers mainly in the south. Otago and Southland, occasional rain, snow lowering to 600 metres in Southland, 800 metres elsewhere tonight. And Chatham Islands, cloudy, a period of rain tonight, then occasional drizzle tomorrow. RNZ National, it's coming up to 5:08.
Thanks, Susanna. Good evening, everybody. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The government has proposed a raft of changes to building laws to make it easier for prefab homes to be produced en masse in a bid to address the housing crisis. The Building and Construction Minister, Jenny Salisa, revealed today the first changes she'll be making early next year. They aim to cut red tape by reducing the time and money it takes to get building consent. Madison Reedy has the details.
Prefab homes have been touted as a potential solution to the housing crisis. The homes are designed and built in a factory, then trucked out to wherever you'd like to plant it. Manufacturers offer one-bedroom studios on wheels for $20,000 or multi-million-dollar houses. The government today announced it wants to see more prefabs used to house the homeless.
These changes will especially help those who are homeless. These kinds of prefab houses will ensure that we get to house more of our people who are homeless, those who are needing transitional houses.
The Building and Construction Minister, Jenny Salisa, has committed to changing the Building Act.
We're going to cut the red tape and make consenting dramatically easier and more efficient for modern methods of building and construction. This includes prefabricated housing and off-site manufacturing like what you see here at House Me. The changes will create a new nationwide end-to-end pathway for manufacturers where we only will need one building consent instead of 2.
The changes also include a reduction of the building levy, a requirement for information about building products, and much higher penalties for those who don't comply, of up to $1.5 million for companies. Prefab manufacturer HouseMe pumps out 200 homes a year for an average sale price of $70,000. It has the space to increase that to 500 homes per annum. HouseMe's national sales manager, Bryce Glover, says the changes will make it easier to scale up.
Anything that's going to improve efficiencies is pretty important to us.
You sell these things, who's buying them?
Quite a few different markets. We're seeing workers' accommodation in the rural and horticultural sector. We're seeing those people definitely getting a lot of traction there. Holiday parks, but then just the basic end user, someone that's got access to some land that they want to maximise the potential of.
So what are prefab buyers in for?
I've got, bedroom storage, kitchens, full functioning kitchen with a fridge, oven, hob, splashback, range hood, breakfast bar, living room.
No walk-in wardrobe though?
No, but we can build you one if you really want to.
The changes are expected to cut the number of building inspections in half. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment's Deputy Chief Executive for Building Resources and Markets, Chris Bunny, says cutting red tape won't solve all of the construction industry's woes, but it helps.
We're hampered by challenges. We have workforce issues. We have 250,000 people that currently work in construction, but we've got a shortage of tens of thousands of people, and as more demand comes on and as the industry kind of turnover happens, that's not going to be fixed anytime soon. So initiatives like modern methods of construction, getting higher productivity, a whole series of things will actually make a big difference.
Jenny Salesa doesn't know how many extra homes the changes will add to the market. And National's building spokesman Andrew Bailey isn't convinced prefabs are the answer.
They might account for maybe 2,000 homes if you're lucky. But we build so many more houses than that, and that's why having an over-reliance or being preoccupied with prefabrication is not necessarily the outcome we want. We want to make sure that prefabrication occurs, but secondly, and more importantly, we need to make sure the existing systems work, and they don't.
The government is still working on a reform of the Resource Management Act and is working with the construction industry after signing an accord earlier this year. Today's announcement is the foundation of the government's building reforms. We'll have to wait until next year to hear more details about the walls and roof to go with it. For Checkpoint, I'm Madison Reedy.
Tensions are rising in Tokyo as the effect of Typhoon Hagibis hits home for Rugby World Cup players and officials. With their slim quarter-final hopes squashed by the cancellation of tomorrow's match against the All Blacks, Italy is expressing disappointment about double standards from World Rugby officials. Scotland, meanwhile, are reportedly incensed at the potential cancellation of their crucial encounter with hosts Japan on Sunday. As Joe Porter reports from Tokyo, a super typhoon is not the only storm brewing.
Safely through to the quarterfinals, the All Blacks are happy enough as they go about their adjusted preparation for the knockout stages at the Rugby World Cup. However, not everyone is so content. Angry Scottish officials are reportedly gearing up to take serious action to ensure their crunch clash with Japan goes ahead. A cancellation would almost certainly send the Scots home, a fate already suffered by an Italian side who won't get a crack at the world champions. The Azzurri captain Sergio Parise is crying hypocrisy, but the All Blacks lock Sam Whitelock says claims the game wouldn't have been called off if it was New Zealand who needed to win to progress are simply untrue.
I can't say I've spent a lot of time with him, but what he's done is pretty awesome. It's probably just a bit of frustration coming out, which is understandable. We're all feeling it as well.
Italy are feeling robbed of the chance to fight for a quarter-final place, but Whitelock insists the All Blacks had no say in the decision to cancel the game.
We would have loved to have played, but it's out of our control. Obviously, we don't make those decisions. It's come from higher ups, but it's a tough one. We're feeling it as players, and they will be as well.
While the decisions are being criticised in some quarters, a day closer to Typhoon Hagibis making landfall, they seem to be bang on based on updated predictions.
The wind field, about 1,400 kilometers, that's half the size of mainland Japan. The eye is still well deformed. It's still equivalent to a Category 5 hurricane. It will lose some strength and most likely make landfall equivalent to a Category 2, but in the metro Tokyo area. With the pressure forecast to be so low, it could be one of the strongest in history.
By the time the storm sweeps through, the All Blacks will be back at their Tokyo base. That sets them up for a normal test week from Monday. Whether their quarter-final opponent will be known by then remains to be seen. The risk of being underdone for the sudden death clash, though, is the bigger issue, and outside back Ben Smith says they're likely to have a game among themselves to replicate the intensity of a match.
They're pretty full on, to be fair, and I remember before we went to the last World Cup we had a simulated game in Auckland, and yeah, it was pretty full on.
Although less serious, the cancellations also have impacts back in New Zealand. Spark Sport aren't commenting on the issue of whether it would get a refund from rugby authorities for viewers, except to say it is in close contact with World Rugby as matters develop. The TAB have confirmed that they will make refunds for bets already made on the 2 matches cancelled so far. But the TAB's Mark Stafford admits not everyone is happy.
I think they're disappointed that they thought they were onto a winner and they don't get the opportunity to win. They just get their money back. One guy tried to tell me we should pay out on the draw because it's been deemed a nil-all draw and he'd back to the draw in New Zealand, Italy, apparently. But no, we can't pay out on a game that's never taken place.
The situation means the All Blacks will have had almost 2 weeks without a game by the time their quarter-final rolls around. But Sam Whitelock says they're used to long spells between games and it won't affect their preparation.
We do it at a rugby championship, play 2 weeks, have a week off, come back, so we should hopefully be in a good space.
For now, though, as Hajibis hones in, that space will be battening down the hatches at their Tokyo hotel. And following the advice given to all and sundry, Ben Smith says they won't be leaving the premises.
It's probably a bit of the unknown. We're sort of same as you, not too sure about these typhoons, but I suppose the talk is just about bunkering down tomorrow and seeing what happens.
The All Blacks are bracing for the super typhoon, World Rugby perhaps bracing for the backlash as the fate of other teams hangs in the balance. In Tokyo, mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Joe Porter aho.
And Joe joins us now live from Shibuya in Tokyo. Joe, what is the weather looking like there at the moment?
Yeah, well, I'm outside on the hotel balcony here, a few floors up, and it is rather grey and overcast, but there's no rain and barely a breath of wind. So maybe it's the calm before the storm, I can't quite tell. But overcast conditions, it's been drizzling on and off throughout the day, but no rain currently and no wind. So it's hard to imagine a super typhoon rolling through here tomorrow, but I guess that's the state of play right now.
And so what about locals? We're all focused on the rugby and the tournament and all the rest of it, but what advice have locals been given?
Well, locals are actually genuinely concerned about this typhoon. Earlier in the week when I was speaking to them, they were like, we get a lot of these typhoons. It might not make landfall. Don't worry about it too much. But today, people are genuinely worried. This could be the biggest typhoon Japan has seen in 50 years. It's currently the biggest storm on Earth, Category 5 hurricane equivalent right now. So they are genuinely worried. I was actually going to meet a friend of mine who lives in Yokohama. We were going to meet at the midway point in Kawasaki between Tokyo and Yokohama tonight to watch the Australia-Georgia match. However, he's too nervous to come up that far from Yokohama in case he can't get back on public transport. So I guess that says a lot. Japanese authorities are telling everyone to stay inside, batten down the hatches. It looks like they will cancel all public transport tomorrow so that no one's tempted to go anywhere. And they're trying to tell tourists not to be foolhardy, not to go outside, not to try and trace the storm or check out what it's like, not to take photos. Because it's not just the extremely high winds that can be dangerous. There's a train going past me behind here in Syria at the moment. It's not just the extremely high winds that are dangerous. It is also debris can be a problem. A stop sign could rip off its post and come careering down a street and crash into an unwary tourist. It could be anything from rubbish along the ground or bits of buildings falling off or rocks from construction sites, gravel in the air. So it's something to be very wary of here in Tokyo in the concrete jungle, that it's not just the high level of wind and rain, it's also what could happen if debris is blowing around all over the place and the damage that could cause to other buildings and, of course, to people. So that everyone has to be very careful. Everyone's being told to stay inside, and it seems like the locals take that advice very seriously. And any fans and supporters who are over here should do that too.
Joe, for the people who are listening to you, we have actually been playing some pictures which show people on roofs in the path of the typhoon. They're strapping tarpaulins onto their roofs, tying them down to stop exactly that problem, debris flying around. But if we go back to the rugby here, if the typhoon has moved through by Saturday, what could it mean for that crucial game still between Scotland and Japan?
Yeah, that's right. It's supposed to have moved past Tokyo, Yokohama by 4 a.m. Sunday morning, which is, well before the match kicks off at 7:45 local time here in Japan on Sunday evening. So it's a wee way away, but what we do know is that the infrastructure could be damaged. Public transport may be out of action. Who knows? Will Yokohama Stadium still be standing? Will the ground be playable on? There are so many variables that could happen between now and then that the game may not be able to be played, even if it's a sunny, shiny, beautiful day here in Tokyo or Yokohama. So certainly a lot of people very nervous about what damage this typhoon could do to Yokohama Stadium, to the infrastructure here in Tokyo and the rest of Japan, and of course to the public transport system and roads. I mean, it really could be chaos after this big super typhoon has gone through. So even if we do have great clear skies and nice conditions on Sunday, it remains to be seen whether the game will be played. World Rugby have up until 6 hours before that game, so about 1:45 p.m. Japan time. That makes it about 5:45 p.m. New Zealand time on Sunday to make a call as to whether or not this game goes ahead. But don't be surprised if this game is cancelled if the super typhoon is as severe as predicted.
Joe, there's one other thing we'd like you to clear up. So there's been a report in the international media that the All Blacks, and the report claims that the All Blacks refused to play a postponed game against Italy on the Monday. Do you know if that's true or not?
Yeah, that's been categorically denied by the All Blacks and by World Rugby. In fact, the All Blacks had no say in the decision to cancel the games whatsoever. They weren't consulted by World Rugby. World Rugby has made this decision entirely on its own. They never had provisions to change the schedule or move games back and forth date-wise or change venues during the pool stages. There was a bit of confusion around that. They only have the ability to move stadia and move the dates of game during the knockout stages when, of course, there is less going on. So it was either play the game or cancel the game. The All Blacks had no say. They were never consulted by World Rugby, never asked their opinion. They, in fact, reached out to World Rugby and said, look, we're happy to play it on the Friday when the weather's supposed to be better. Of course, it is better today. And they were never asked whether or not they wanted to play on Sunday. World Rugby never got back to them. They went ahead and made the decision to cancel the game in the interests of people's safety, and none of the other teams were consulted. So it's balderdash, to say the least, that the All Blacks are the villains here, refusing to play a game on Monday.
Thanks, Joe. Stay safe while you're there. That is Joe Porter, or as we like to call him, Joe Sporter, joining us live there from Tokyo. He'll keep us up to date with goings on there with the typhoon and obviously the Rugby World Cup. It is 22 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen as always to hear from you about anything you've heard on the program this evening, so let us know what's on your mind. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. An oncologist says New Zealand owes Southland man Blair Vining a debt of gratitude for the precious time he spent campaigning for a better health system before cancer took his life earlier today. Blair Vining, a father of 2, was diagnosed with terminal cancer last year and was told even though he only had days to live, he would have to wait 2 months for an urgent appointment. Now, that prompted him to organise a petition calling for a national cancer agency, something the government has since promised. Oncologist Chris Jackson says although everyone knew this day was coming, it's indescribably tough to lose someone as selfless as Blair.
Blair started off as a patient. He became a collaborator and ended up a mate. He was a once-in-a-lifetime patient for me and a truly incredible guy.
Can you tell us when he died?
He died early this morning, so he was diagnosed last November and had known from that time that he was dying from cancer. And over the course of last year, he's fought incredibly, and he's had a number of different treatments in order to help shrink his cancer and to keep it at bay. But it was always going to get him, and in recent days it's become more and more apparent that the treatments that we'd been trying hadn't been working. And so we backed out of active treatment, and he got home, where he was able to be on his farm in his chair, surrounded by his family in the environment he wanted to be. So he was at home with his family and with people who he loved.
Back down on the farm, eh?
Yeah.
So that is a significant sacrifice when you have so little time left that you spend it battling for things to make things better when you know you're not going to be here to see that, isn't it?
He's the most incredibly selfless guy I think I've met. Many people, when they get diagnosed with cancer or have tragedy, ask the question, why me? Blair asked a different question, and that question he asked was, well, why anyone? And he set about trying to fix things for other people to make sure they wouldn't have to go through what he experienced. And the journey was so public, many thousands of people, literally thousands of people, reached out to him and messaged him and shared their stories with him. And those stories deeply upset him and made him feel angry at the injustice of what people were experiencing and more determined to fix it for other people. Blair's philosophy was to keep things simple and to get stuff done and to make sure that, as he liked to say, we kick cancer's ass and that we made a difference for all New Zealanders and to make sure that people wouldn't have to suffer like he did. He found it outrageous that we had a postcode lottery of cancer care around the country and wanted to see that people in his area got world-class cancer care and that all New Zealanders had the chance to have the same high standard of care.
Do you think that cancer patients are better off as a result of the things that he did and the public attention that he's drawn to the problem, particularly in Southland?
Well, undoubtedly. I think that what we've seen with the cancer petition that which he led, 143,000 signatures is a record for any kind of cancer-related petition in New Zealand. And the establishment of the Cancer Agency, which he specifically called for after our Cancer at the Crossroads conference, is truly historic. It's the biggest change we've had in New Zealand cancer governance in 20 years, if not ever. And other countries that have had cancer agencies have delivered some pretty major changes. And I think that if the Cancer Agency in New Zealand is given the same scope and the same rope, then it will do the same here. But there's a lot of ifs and buts. And when I sat with Blair last on Saturday, we spent time talking together, and he knew the end was near. And I said, "What do you want to see from here, Blair? What do we need to do?" And he said, "Well, just keep your foot in the throat, don't let up, and keep fighting, and make sure that what we've started, that we complete this." And that's what we have to do.
So he was obviously involved also in trying to get a charitable hospital going. What are the core projects that you think Blair would want to see followed through to completion?
Well, he wanted to see an end to postcode cancer care, so to make sure that all New Zealanders had access to that best quality care. He was passionate about getting people better access to colonoscopy as well, not just in Southland but also nationwide. And also over recent time, Blair became more and more aware of the gap in medicines funding in New Zealand compared to other countries, and that was important to him as well. He said he didn't think people should have to sell their houses to get access to a few more months of life. And he was aware that there were many people around New Zealand who didn't have insurance or financial resources that enabled them to have the same sorts of treatments that he was able to, and he felt that was deeply unfair too. And he wanted to see New Zealanders' access to treatments improved.
His wife, Melissa, graciously shared her husband with the rest of the country during his final months. How's she and the girls doing?
She's being well supported by family and friends at the moment, but we have spent a lot of time speaking over recent days and got to spend a lot of time with them both on Saturday. I think when you're losing someone who you love so much, it is absolutely utterly terrible. It is indescribably terrible, even though she's known for a year that he was dying. The pain of losing someone you love so much is just enormous. And while there is comfort in knowing that he has achieved an incredible amount in a very short space of time, perhaps more in a year than many people have achieved in their lives, still your soulmate, your best mate, someone who you care for so much, to see them dying at the end and slipping and fading away is just indescribably painful. And there are a lot of people who love her and who love them and are around them at the moment, and that will be of some comfort. But the pain, I think, just can't be understated, and people who've lost, other people who've lost people they love understand that completely.
I know this is still so very raw for you all, but how will you remember Blair?
Oh, in so many ways. Blair, so many ways. He was funny. He was incredibly humble, so selfless, and he was a great teacher. So a coach for the boys in his rugby team, when you could see him around kids, you could see just how he lifted and how he sparked. I will remember his calmness, his sincerity and his dignity, and I'll remember his selflessness and his sacrifice and his determination that people should not suffer. I think New Zealand owes him an enormous debt for what he has given. He is a truly remarkable man, and he's someone who I'm just so proud to call my friend.
And that was oncologist Chris Jackson. Blair Vining is survived by his wife Melissa and their 2 children. Up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, tens of thousands of people flee their homes in northern Syria. Dunedin students say the flat party culture has grown because the university has become the fun police, shutting down bars around the city. And around 1,000 people a day are climbing Australia's Uluru before climbing the world's famous Red Rock is banned at the end of the month. We'd love to hear from you. Get in touch on anything you've heard on the program today, including the building changes that are coming through for prefabricated houses, or get in touch with us about what you think Blair Vining's legacy is. It is dead on 5:30. Time for the headlines with Susanna.
A man who was stabbed 6 times in a violent dairy robbery has told a court he will feel the effects of the attack for the rest of his life. Siddhartha Patel and his mother Geeta were stabbed by a teenager while working at Greylands Highlight Dairy last June. Ngatama Kayenua was jailed for 14 years in the High Court at Auckland today for his role as lookout during the attack. A slew of changes to building laws should make it easier for companies to mass-produce prefab homes. And the Building and Construction Minister Jenny Salesa says the streamlined rules will halve the likely number of building inspections. The Building Act changes will also introduce minimum requirements for information about building products and clearer roles and responsibilities for manufacturers, suppliers and builders. Winston Peters says the emergence of Christopher Luxon as a potential National Party candidate is an indictment on the current leadership. Mr Luxon, the former Air New Zealand chief, has announced he would like to stand for National in the Auckland electorate of Botany next year. And he's won an early endorsement from the former Prime Minister Sir John Key. But the New Zealand First Leader says it's appalling Mr Luxon is being parachuted in as a leader in waiting. The US President says he has 3 options following the Turkish attack on Kurdish fighters in northern Syria. Donald Trump tweeted he could intervene militarily, threaten sanctions or lead a mediation effort between Turkey and the Kurds. He's told journalists he prefers the mediation. Bipartisan efforts are underway in Congress to introduce legislation threatening sanctions against Turkey. The police have spoken to staff at a South Auckland kindergarten after a child was injured there. They say the child received facial injuries at the Manurewa West kindergarten on Wednesday. A Ministry of Education spokesperson says a ministry team was at the kindergarten today to gather more information. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen and Nona Peltier is in the studio for business. You can probably hear her shuffling all her business papers.
My
so
important
weighty
papers.
Issue business.
Oh, it is.
Nona, interesting news today. Air New Zealand has named its new chief executive and he's coming from Walmart in the US. What can you tell us?
Well, he's a Kiwi. His name is Greg Foran. He grew up, Hamilton Hastings is where he was raised. Started his first job at Woolworths as a night filler, stock shelf, that sort of thing. And quickly found his way into management at the age of 20. Moved on to Australia and worked there for quite a long time for Woolworths still. But we was passed over as the chief executive role there. He left Australia, moved on to Walmart. And he's been with Walmart, I guess, since about 2011. And in the last 5 years as their chief executive and president of their U.S. operations. So the sales numbers he deals with, over $300 billion a year. These are big numbers. He's got 1.3 million staff reporting to him. But I think he's really missed
1.3 million staff.
That's right.
Pretty almost the population of Auckland that he is responsible for as employees.
That's right. And he also over half of Americans shop at Walmart. And for people who don't know what Walmart is, it'd be hard to believe, but there are people who potentially do not know what Walmart is. And it's sort of like a shop where they offer very cheap prices for middle Americans. And it's very popular. They sell everything from grocery items through to clothing, housewares, you name it, everything. And so he's described as a man who's, I guess, a jack of all trades, master of none. That's the way he describes himself. His boss at Walmart describes him as a man with a capable mind and a good heart. So I'm supposing now that the Air New Zealand folk will be quite happy to welcome him on board when he takes on his new role at the beginning of next year in the first quarter. So anyways, the share price like that, it rose 2 cents today, Air New Zealand share price. So yeah, there you go.
Okay, well, let's move on to Jules. Michael Hill, like in the brand International, Michael Hill International Strategy for Growth. It's working?
It is. Their share price rose 15%.
Because didn't they shut down some shops at one point recently?
A lot. Yeah. They shut down their American operations. They shut down the Emma and Roe branding that they had, these little shops that didn't work out for them. They shut down underperforming stores. In fact, they shut down 3 underperforming stores in the last quarter in Australia, which accounts for about 60% of their revenue. So that's their sales. Yeah, that has been still a very challenging market for them. There's a lot of competition that's driving down prices. But the New Zealand operation, which is a more mature one, has delivered, and so has their Canadian operations, which continues to grow. And so there, yeah, share price rose more than 14% today, up 9 cents to 71. There you go. And overall, our index rose 1/3%, 37 points up to 10,924. And the dollar is steady, 63.2 US cents, 93.3 Australian, and 50.8 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with our business wrap. And the premature anointing of Christopher Luxon as a National Party candidate could prove problematic for the party's leader, Simon Bridges. The former Air New Zealand boss has yet to get the formal stamp of approval as Nationals candidate in the Botany electorate, and then battle through a gloves-off campaign. If he does win his way into Parliament next year, talk will quickly turn to his chances as leader. Mr Luxon isn't giving interviews until after the selection process has run its course, but plenty of others have weighed in on his political future. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Just a day after Christopher Luxon announced he'd throw his hat in the ring for the national candidacy in Botany, and his name already has a certain shine to it among voters in the Auckland electorate. Indeed, some seem to think he already has the job in the bag.
Yeah, he's the new MP, and I hope he gets the vote. He'll have my vote anyway.
100% support him.
Probably has got a lot more credibility, perhaps a lot more honest.
National need to get their act together, and Luxon would be a good choice.
He's already won some high-profile endorsements too. Sir John Key, the former Prime Minister, throwing his weight behind the former Air New Zealand boss on News Talk ZB.
Look, he's a world-class candidate. He brings, I think, huge business experience, international experience. He's a great communicator, but he's actually a modern-day thinker for New Zealand, and I think he'll do the same thing if he makes it into Parliament.
But Mr Luxon's easy arrival could yet turn into a bitter battle. If successful in his bid to be Nationals contender, he'll face off against the incumbent Jamie Lee Ross, a man fighting for his political survival with little to lose. Mr Ross struck out as an independent last year, throwing a grenade into the National Party on his way out the door. And he's promising not to go quietly.
Local people deserve a local voice. They have someone who's a strong local voice right now, and I'm happy to put that 15-year track record up for people to make a decision on.
Botany is a true blue seat. It's voted 2 ticks national since its formation. In fact, Jamie Lee Ross won more than 21,000 votes at the last election. The next candidate behind him got just 8,500. But with Mr Ross now an independent, the Auckland councillor Sharon Stewart is picking voters will stick with the party over the candidate.
What we had in the last year or so has been ghastly, to be perfectly honest, and people want a clean election, and they don't want to have people that are firing bullets at each other and bringing up dirt.
I just don't think he's been upfront and honest.
I've got no time for him whatsoever. If you're married, you stay with your wife. You don't mess around with other women.
His reputation is like pull me down. That's why I don't like him.
The sentiment's not what Mr Ross says he's hearing on the ground. He says he's confident voters will back him over a candidate parachuted in from outside.
In fact, I think it's arrogant and cynical and quite frankly rude towards the local community here in Botany for the National Party board to believe they can use this seat as simply a stepping stone to solve their leadership issues.
And therein lies another potential problem for National, chiefly for its leader Simon Bridges. Mr Bridges has turned down interview requests on the topic thus far, but is surely not pleased at the prospect of increasing commentary touting Mr Luxon as a leader in waiting, a narrative his political opponents are already revelling in.
This is a terrible commentary on the current leadership and talent of the National Party.
The New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters, never one to pull his punches. The Deputy Prime Minister lambasting any move to drop an outsider in an electorate, and for a former leader in Sir John to effectively anoint him.
The old National Party would have thought that was sacrilegious and downright bad manners.
This is all premature, of course. Mr Luxon still has to make it through a selection committee and then win over some 60 national delegates from the Botany area. Then he has to win his way into Parliament. Not until then will the public see how he performs as an MP, and perhaps more importantly, how he gets along with a caucus full of those with their own ambitions. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
And let us know what you all make of that. Do you see Chris Luxon as the future leader of the National Party? Let us know your thoughts. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A man who acted as a lookout during a violent dairy robbery in Auckland has been sentenced to 14 years in jail. Ngā Tamakae Nua never entered the dairy but kept watch as a teenager stabbed 2 shopkeepers in Greylands Highlight Dairy last June. The offence is the 28-year-old's third strike, which carries the maximum penalty of 14 years without parole under the 3 strikes legislation. But as Annika Smith reports, the judge deemed it unjust to not give him the chance of getting out early.
On the 19th of June last year, a 16-year-old entered Highlight Dairy with a kitchen knife. He waited until the shop was clear of customers before attacking Siddhartha Patel. The teenager, who can't be identified, stabbed him in the head, shoulder and stomach while trying to open the till. He then turned the knife on Siddhartha's mother, Geeta, who had rushed to her son's aid. Kai Inouye didn't hold the knife or even enter the dairy, but was found guilty of being party to the crime. Justice Galt explained his role at sentencing this morning.
Meanwhile, Mr Kainoa was waiting near 2 rubbish bins some metres past the dairy's entrance. When ran out of the dairy, he gestured at Mr Kainoa, then ran off down the road. Mr Kainoa did not react except to shift his position slightly. He then straightened up.
Kai Inouye leant back on the bin before walking across Great North Road. The 28-year-old gave evidence in his own defence at trial. He told the court that he acted calmly out of fear he'd be wrongly implicated in the attack. But the Crown argued his cool demeanour showed the attempted robbery was planned and he was in on it. Justice Galt found Kai Inouye was involved in encouraging and planning the attack.
Mr Kainoa knew there was a real possibility that the knife could be used intentionally and those inside the dairy could be stabbed.
The judge said the Crown did not prove Kai Inouye knew the knife would be used to seriously hurt those inside. He found the Otahuhu man's role was aiding and abetting the teenager or being a party to the offending. Justice Galt said the effects on his victims could not be understated.
Mr Patel was in hospital for 6 weeks and had multiple surgeries. He felt helpless and was stressed because his family was finding it hard both to run the dairy and visit him. He is now back at the dairy but finds it difficult to work at night. He said what they did that day and its consequences for him personally will affect the rest of his life.
Crime Prevention Group President Sunny Kaushal says this isn't surprising.
It leaves a trail of pain, destruction, trauma, and on top of it, the families, they are not sell those businesses because of it drops the value of the business.
He says offenders know life is cheap and they'll be before the parole board long before their end sentence date. Kai Inouye was on his 3rd strike for the robbery attack. This meant the judge had to impose the maximum penalty of 14 years in jail unless it was manifestly unjust. The court heard the defendant suffered abuse and neglect as a child and had developed a propensity for violence and substance abuse.
The pre-sentence report writer assesses Mr Kainoa's likelihood of reoffending as very high, and I consider, given his history and the psychological report, this can only be correct. But I am not willing to write Mr Kainoa off, and I hope that there is treatment and therapy available to him which may reduce his risk of offending.
Justice Galt found it was manifestly unjust to impose a finite term of 14 years in jail or any finite term. He jailed the man for 14 years with no minimum non-parole period, meaning he could be free in about 4.5 years. Atu i te ko Ti Matua ko Annika Smith tēnei.
It is almost 6:15. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your thoughts on that one. Should we just get rid of the third strike law there if judges are choosing not to use it? That man who was on his third strike, who would normally be facing a maximum penalty with no parole, judge said it was manifestly unfair. So do you agree with that or not? Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Dunedin students say the flat party culture has grown in response to Otago University acting as the fun police and clamping down on student pubs and bars. But a leading preventive medicine researcher says flat parties are driven by a proliferation of cheap alcohol and lax liquor laws. 19-year-old Sophia Crestani died when hundreds of people tried to flee a party on Dundas Street last weekend. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown visited Student Digs, where he spoke to residents about the attraction of flat parties.
It wasn't that long ago, Otago University students revelling in their newfound independence descended in their hundreds on the big three student pubs in Dunedin: the Gardies, the Bowler and the Cook. Attracted by the lure of $5 jugs, cheap shots and a warm room, students happily poured into nearby pubs. Now those student haunts are closed or completely different from their hedonistic heyday. The university now owns the land the Gardies and the Bowler used to occupy. Third-year communications student Emily Wade says flat parties have filled the void. I spoke to the 21-year-old in the sparse and drafty dining room of her flat, one of many in an old multiplex on Dundas Street. Flat parties have always been a feature of university life, but Miss Wade says there are now regular big flat parties, and by big she means hundreds going along.
Some flats have traditionally several big parties in a year, but yeah, they probably about once a month. I'd say there's at least one big annual one of some sort.
And these are the ones that attracts potentially hundreds?
Yeah, and people not just from university. Like for Agnew, our flatmate, he had some of his friends come down from Auckland and Christchurch to stay here just to go.
Miss Wade says there's a perception the Otago University is waging a war on fun and trying to close down student pubs. Her flatmate, Emma Walker, says the availability of cheap booze from nearby liquor stores means students aren't going to walk from North Dunedin to the Octagon for crowded and expensive bars.
If you go out to town, you can't bring your own drinks, you have to buy drinks, you have to stand in line for 30 plus minutes in the freezing cold. It's just a bit more friendly, I guess, going to flat parties, and it's closer. I don't have to walk outside in the cold for 30 minutes just to spend an hour in a really loud club to go home to get knackers.
A 10-year study found far fewer students in Dunedin were drinking in pubs in 2014 compared to a decade earlier. In the mid-2000s, the student pubs were known for their outlandish marketing campaigns, such as the Cook's all-day binge drinking fest, or the Bowler's promotion offering a petrol-soaked couch and matches. But rather than the university playing an active role in the demise of the student pub, the Dunedin School of Medicine's Chair of Preventive and Social Medicine, Jenny Connor, says the campaigns were a last-ditch attempt by bars to hold on to their customers.
They were not financially viable. It's got nothing to do with the university. In their desperation to attract more students to their pubs, the Captain Cook, the Bowling Green, and probably to a lesser extent the Gardies, they've gone to great measures to try and be outrageous and have irresponsible promotions to try and get the students to come and behave in the way that they perceived students should behave and that would make them a living. And it failed.
Professor Connor says the continued existence of student bars such as Starters and Union Bar doesn't support the argument that the university is acting as the fun police. She says flat parties have always existed, but are now driven by cheap off-site alcohol and social media.
There's been a big change in terms of drinking in pubs, certainly in the last generation, and that revolves largely around how cheap alcohol is. So a generation ago there was no alcohol in supermarkets,
and of course the purchase age was higher. So that flood of cheap alcohol in the universities wasn't there. This is one of the things that applies to the whole population, not just the student population.
Professor Connor says the only way to really tackle flat party culture is by increasing the price of alcohol and bringing it more in line with what's on offer at licensed premises. Dunedin Mayor Dave Cull says the council attempted to put in place measures to reduce alcohol harm in the city, such as restrictions on the number of liquor outlets in the student quarter and the hours they could operate, but was frustrated when its local alcohol policy was successfully appealed by outlets, including the country's 2 supermarket giants.
There's several sources of frustration. One is that if you've got a local alcohol plan which is designed to allow the community to set its own rules, it's a farce to have it overruled from Wellington, so it's not a local alcohol policy at all. And the other is that it would appear that in this country we know the causes of alcohol-related harm, so insofar as we won't do anything about them, we're putting corporate profits ahead of community wellbeing.
Professor Connor and Mr Cull want to see alcohol reform and a reversal of the 2012 liberalisation of liquor laws. Otago University says it will consider wider discussions arising from the death of second-year student Sophia Cristani once the police investigation is complete. The manor, the flat in which she was fatally injured as hundreds left a party on Saturday night, will be leased by the university as a uni flat next year. In Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
About 1,000 people a day are climbing Uluru, the world-famous red rock at the heart of Australia, as tourists rush for a last chance to climb the landmark before a ban comes into force. Uluru, also known as Ayers Rock, is sacred to the Anangu Nation, the traditional owners of the UNESCO-listed site, who have spent years encouraging people not to climb it out of respect. Access will be restricted from October 26th. The ABC's Max Chalmers reports.
Head to Uluru and you'll likely see a large crowd of tourists hauling themselves up the rock with the help of a chain link fence. Normally, around 15% of visitors do the climb. That's increased ahead of the closure, and more climbers means more injuries. Michael Misso is manager of the Uluru Katajuta National Park.
I have climbed. Unfortunately, it was to support rescues, and also we have what's called a climb patrol, which is going up there to just see how things are going, picking up rubbish. Sometimes people build little cans of rock, so little piles of rock, and we remove those. For our staff, the actual reality of going up for a rescue, it's not a nice thing. So the day that we don't have to do that, I think will be a very big relief for all the park staff as well.
2 years ago, Anangu traditional owners and the Parks Board of Management unanimously agreed to close the climb. Concern over the safety of climbers was one reason. The other was that the Uluru climb is a men's sacred area for Anangu. Sammy Wilson is one of the traditional owners and the chair of the Parks Board of Management.
We're not going to take the rock away. It's always going to be there, and the sacred law is always going to be part of it.
In the lead up to the close, Sammy Wilson and other traditional owners are declining interview requests. They made their feelings known in a statement released in 2017.
Anangu have always held this place of law. Other people have found it hard to understand what this means. They can't see it. But for Anangu, it is indisputable.
Uluru Katajuta National Park manager Michael Misso explains the decision this way.
It's like similar World Heritage sites across the world. You wouldn't have people climbing the pyramids or a cathedral in Europe. The thought of people climbing what is a sacred site was just culturally inappropriate, but as well as because of the safety reasons, because over 30 people have died climbing Uluru. People do get injured. So those factors were the key factors that led to the decision of the board.
Visitor numbers to Uluru have been increasing in recent years. Tourism operators aren't worried the end of the climb will do serious damage to their trade. Eddie Fry is the chairperson of the Indigenous Land and Sea Corporation. The corporation owns the Ayers Rock Resort at Uluru, which includes 5 hotels and a major campground.
We're currently running around 85% occupancy on average, and November is clearly in that ballpark as well, and that's post the climb. So it's an indication that people obviously want to come to Uluru to see it. They don't need to climb it.
The Parks Management has been speaking to other park operators around the country as they try to balance public access and cultural rights.
Max Chalmers reporting. Top Tongan rugby players have snubbed their own domestic rugby league organisation in order to play upcoming international games. The Tonga National Rugby League sacked coach Christian Wolf weeks out from the matches, prompting a war of words that is now threatening to head to the courts. A newly dubbed Tonga Invitational 13 will now play, featuring the sacked coach and the marquee players who rallied behind him. Alex Perrottet reports.
How did one of the greatest success stories of Pacific Rugby League so spectacularly implode in the middle of an international tournament? Matema'a Tonga, currently still fourth ranked in the world behind Australia, England and New Zealand, is in disarray, having sacked the coach Christian Wolf and been suspended by the Rugby League International Federation amid claims and counterclaims of financial mismanagement. But since the suspension, Tonga's Supreme Court has exonerated the TNRL, and its secretary, William Edwards, says he's outraged the Federation hasn't acknowledged that.
Without our knowledge, the international body turns around and announces a Tongan invitational team without speaking to us, without asking our consent, and without advising us in advance that they were going to do it. And I find it absolutely devastating for a governing body to be treated that way by an international body.
William Edwards says it's unprecedented.
It's never happened in any other sport where players have made outrageous and false accusations about a board. They've never even bothered to actually check whether there's any substance to the allegations before carrying out their actions.
But the Rugby League International Federation is sticking to its guns. Jeremy Edwards is a Southern Hemisphere General Manager, and he's also the spokesperson for GB Oceania Limited, the company running these international games. He says RLIF was shocked with the mid-season sacking of Christian Wolf and acted on the recommendation of Tongan authorities.
That was incredibly alarming. We met with the chairman of Tonga National Rugby League and asked him to please see reason and not to do that. Rejected that. We then went to Tonga, and then we were informed by the Prime Minister of the day that Tonga National Rugby League had lost the support of the local clubs and had lost the support of the international players.
William Edwards says Tonga's Supreme Court dissolved the previous TNRL board, saying substantial funds had not been accounted for. He says the acting PM of the day who wrote to Jeremy Edwards and RLIF is Semisi Seka, who was involved in that previous board and therefore had a glaring conflict of interest. Jeremy Edwards says he's not up to date with Tongan law, and while the investigation is underway, so is the competition desperate to have the best Tongan players on the field. But the fight doesn't end there. William Edwards says the advertisements for the upcoming games refer to Matema'a Tonga, which is a Tongan registered trademark that he renewed last month.
It's bizarre because they'll suspend us, but in the meantime, we're going to use your property rights. We're going to take photos of all the players in your uniforms, and we're going to use the words Matema'a Tonga to promote the game, and they're doing so for a commercial benefit, but they don't care about our rights.
William Edwards has written to Duco, the promoter, as well as GB Oceania Limited, threatening legal action. Jeremy Edwards says he's consulted lawyers and there's an agreement with a New Zealand registered company called Matema'a Tonga Limited to use the name.
Our legal advice tells us that that is the right thing to do, to use that, and also to use and a new logo and the jerseys.
Matema'a Tonga Limited in New Zealand could not confirm a commercial agreement was in fact in place. William Edwards says he doesn't blame the players, but puts the blame squarely at the feet of Christian Wolf.
I wouldn't want to talk to him. I think he's a disgrace as a man. What coach do you know would go and ask the players to strike?
RNZ has received messages showing that Christian Wolf did encourage key players to stick together and support him over the sacking issue. We have repeatedly sought comment from Christian Wolf, but he has not responded. Jeremy Edwards says the focus now is to get a competitive Tongan team on the field for the good of the fans.
The most important thing for us at the moment is to continue the tournament on, get the players back onto the field, and give the fans what they want to see, which is the quality Tongan side.
The full-strength Tongan Invitational 13, including Jason Taumalolo, David Fusitua, Andrew Fifita, Michael Jennings and recent NRL Grand Final winner Daniel Tupou, are set to take the field against Australia at Eden Park on November the 2nd, a double header that also features Samoa against Fiji. For Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
And time for some quick feedback before the 6 o'clock news on the question of whether Chris Luxon could potentially be the next leader of the National Party. This person, Sally, says, no way will I vote National next election, even with Luxon potentially on board. Now, understanding and seeing what the current government have been faced with doing, I and many others are realising Mr Nice Guy, John Key, who I voted for, did absolutely nothing for 9 years, says Sally. She goes on to say, I am watching in awe as this government work with all the untouched issues.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata with DNA. The government says proposed changes to building laws will make it easier for prefab homes to be produced en masse. The changes aim to cut red tape by reducing the time and money it takes to get a building consent in a bid to address the housing crisis. Prefab manufacturer HouseMe sells 200 homes a year for an average sale price of $70,000. It has the space to increase that to 500 homes per annum. HouseMe's national sales manager Bryce Glover says the changes will make it easier to scale up.
Anything that's going to improve efficiencies is pretty important to us.
Bryce Glover of HouseMe. A man facing 14 years behind bars for being a lookout in a violent dairy robbery has escaped a fixed jail term. Siddhartha Patel and his mother Geeta were attacked by a teenager while working at Greylands Highlight Dairy last June. Ngātama Kainua never entered the dairy but kept watch as a teenager stabbed the pair with a kitchen knife. He was jailed for 14 years with no minimum non-parole period in the High Court at Auckland today. Kainua maintained the stabbing came as a complete surprise, but Justice Gold found the 28-year-old aided and abetted the teenager.
Mr Kainua knew there was a real possibility that the knife could be used intentionally and those inside the dairy could be stabbed.
Justice Gold. The All Blacks lock Sam Whitlock says that they're heeding the advice of Japanese authorities and won't leave their hotel during Super Typhoon Hagibis. The All Blacks match against Italy has been cancelled. He says he feels for fans who have had their plans ruined. Whitlock says none of the players have experienced a typhoon before and they'll be doing what they're told.
It's a weird feeling, but the thing is we've just got to trust the people that know what's coming. I've never been in a typhoon, so listening to the people that know and take that advice. So I know there's some disappointed people who travelled from all around the world to see a couple of games. They're going to miss out on that, but that's something that comes second. It's not just about rugby, it's around people's safety.
The All Blacks move hotels tonight, leaving Tokyo Bay and the Hilton on the coastline north of Tokyo for the Conrad, which is in a more central part of Tokyo City. The US President Donald Trump says he faces three options following the Turkish attack on Kurdish fighters in northern Syria. He says he could intervene militarily, threaten sanctions or lead a mediation effort between Turkey and the Kurds. Mr Trump told journalists he preferred the last option but ruled nothing out.
We have no soldiers in Syria. We've won. We beat ISIS, and we beat them badly and decisively. The last thing I want to do is bring thousands and thousands of soldiers in and defeat everybody again. We've already done that. You have the choice of bringing in the military and defeating everybody again, or you have the choice of financially doing some very strong things to Turkey.
Bipartisan efforts are getting underway in Congress to introduce legislation threatening sanctions against Turkey. A leading academic says any serious attempt to tackle problem drinking in Dunedin's student quarter will require reform of the liquor laws. Jenny Connor from the Dunedin School of Medicine's Chair of Preventative and Social Medicine says research shows Dunedin students are drinking less heavily now compared to last decade. Her comments follow the death of second-year student Sophia Crestani, who was fatally injured as hundreds left a flat party on Saturday night. There'll be more of the story in Checkpoint. Drinking among the city students is driven by the abundance of cheap booze from nearby liquor stores.
There's been a big change in terms of drinking in pubs, certainly in the last generation, and that revolves largely around how cheap alcohol is. So a generation ago, there was no alcohol in supermarkets, and of course the purchase age was higher. So that flood of cheap alcohol in the university wasn't there.
Jenny O'Connor says lawmakers need to look at the availability of cheap alcohol. The police have spoken to staff at a South Auckland kindergarten after a child was injured there. They say the child received facial injuries at the Manurewa West kindergarten on Wednesday. The police, as well as the Ministry of Education, are looking into the incident. The kindergarten's manager declined an interview, but says they are working with the ministry on its investigation. It's 6:04. Scott McLaughlin isn't making any promises, but believes he can go even faster in qualifying for the Bathurst 1000 motor race. For the second time in as many days, the New Zealand Supercars driver has set a lap record in practice at Mount Panorama. McLaughlin has gone almost a third of a second quicker than his record-breaking effort yesterday, with fellow Kiwi Andre Heimgartner second fastest. Qualifying has just got underway at Bathurst, and McLaughlin is tempering expectation of an even faster lap of the famous circuit.
I don't know. You'd hope so, but we've got to remember, Sunday's the main day. But I always like popping out a lap, and we'll see how we go.
Things haven't gone so well for seven-time series champion Jamie Wincup, who hit the wall in practice trying to avoid a crash. New Zealand's best basketballer has shown no mercy against the Breakers. Stephen Adams has scored 19 points in just 19 minutes on court to lead NBA team the Oklahoma City Thunder to a 26-point victory in Oklahoma City this afternoon. Adams also had 10 rebounds as the Breakers finished their Australian NBL pre-season with the 110-84 loss. And the New Zealand squash player Paul Cole has been beaten in the quarterfinals at the US Open. The Kiwi world number 5 has gone down to defending champion and world number 2 Mohamed El Shabagi of Egypt in 3 games in Philadelphia. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, Megan Phelps Roper, once a member of the most hated family in America, on how her mind was changed. Investigative journalist Mike White on the charm of dogs. Zadie Smith on her first collection of short fiction. And Dr. Marian Vanden Belt on the importance of seaweed. Join me, Kim Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Wellington, including Taumaranui, Taihape and also Wairarapa. Fine spells, isolated showers with some heavy falls tonight. Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Rain with heavy falls tonight and isolated showers from the west and south. Marlborough, Nelson and Buller, fine spells and a few showers, heavy about the ranges tomorrow afternoon. Westland and Fiordland, rain tonight, possibly heavy in Westland, showers tomorrow. Canterbury, scattered showers mainly in the south. Otago and Southland, occasional rain, snow lowering to 600 metres in Southland and 800 metres elsewhere. Chatham Islands, cloudy, some rain tonight, drizzle tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 6:07.
Thanks, Susanna. Happy Friday, everybody, and thanks for tuning in to Checkpoint. Nearly 2 years after several Destiny Church branches were supposedly stripped of their charitable status, they are still operating without paying tax. 2 of Destiny's charities were taken off the charities register in 2017, but they appealed that decision and the case has been tied up in the courts ever since. The charities are finally due to appear in court again at the end of this month, but Destiny won't comment on what has held things up for so long. Nita Blake-Person reports.
Destiny International Trust and Te Hahi o Ngā Matamua Holdings, both part of the Destiny International Group, were warned in early 2017 that the Charities Registration Board intended to remove them because of their persistent failure to file annual returns. The charities, which are 2 of the church's largest, filed formal objections, but the board removed them anyway, saying it was in the public interest. Last week, the 2 charities finally filed returns for 2018, a year after they were due, which revealed they incurred a loss of more than $500,000 and their current liabilities exceed assets by more than $1 million. The group's auditor, Grant Thornton, says the conditions it's facing indicate a material uncertainty that may cast significant doubt on the group's ability to continue as a going concern. Destiny declined to comment on the returns but provided a brief written statement.
Destiny Church and its entities continue to work with independent auditors Grant Thornton in the preparation of our annual returns for the charity's services requirements.
They also warned Checkpoint.
Please be advised, Destiny Church and its entities will take action regarding any untruths, unqualified statements or inflated opinions about its entities or finances going forward.
Peter Lynham is a retired professor who specialises in religious studies. He says the church faces growing competition in the religious sector.
Destiny is not attracting the kind of support it once had. There's a real decline in people's willingness to give, and that could well be reflected in the willingness to attend, or really the significance of Destiny within the South Auckland religious world.
But despite the action in December 2017, both charities remain registered nearly 2 years on, as entities remain on the register while an appeal process is underway. Juliet Chevalier-Watts is a charity law specialist at Waikato University and says that's the reality of the legal process.
As it stands at the moment, because there is nothing that they have done that's inappropriate as far as the court's concerned, yet obviously we're waiting for the cases to be heard, and once those cases then released, then obviously decisions can be made as to whether they may well be deregistered or to be kept in the register. But as it stands, I think yes, it's appropriate they continue to do business as usual and to be carrying out the public good, which is what they're supposed to be doing.
She says charity services are thorough operators and will be following due process.
I know that the charity services, operates in a very effective manner overall, and from my dealings with them in the past, I've not seen any issues arising with regard to length of process with which they deal things. But with some situations, unfortunately, they can be very complex and they can take a long period of time to resolve. Information going back and forth, obtaining information. So, and obviously, I've not personally been involved with the Destiny Church side of things, but it may well be that it is entirely appropriate for it to have taken that particular length of time.
The hearing is set down for the High Court in Wellington at the end of this month. For Checkpoint, I'm Nita Blakeperson.
A campaigner against wrongful convictions and former Canadian justice official says jailhouse informants are among the most dangerous of witnesses, and New Zealand should consider tightening its rules around their use. Bruce McFarlane QC was a Canadian Crown prosecutor and former Deputy Justice Minister for the state of Manitoba, and he was involved in drafting tighter guidelines for the use of jailhouse witnesses there. In New Zealand, in 2017, one of 3 jailhouse informants who gave evidence against David Tamahere in his murder trial for the killing of 2 Swedish tourists was found guilty of multiple counts of perjury for lying at that 1990 trial. Bruce McFarlane believes up to 2% of convictions are wrongful convictions, and while there are usually multiple causes, jailhouse informants are among the main ones.
As a whole, in very general terms, they are highly unreliable, almost to the point of being dangerous. They have been characterized as the most dangerous witness that ever goes near a courthouse.
Why? Why are they the most dangerous?
Because they were in jail at the time that they say they received a confession from the accused person. So they're in jail for a reason. They're criminals. They often have serious criminal records. They don't want to be in jail, and they'll do almost anything to get out. So they will literally put up their hands and say, that fellow made a confession to me. So if you're interested in having that, let's sit down and see if we can make a deal here. And often they've simply made up the confession. It didn't take place, but that's their ticket out.
Obviously, we have had a number of high-profile cases in New Zealand where we have used jailhouse informants. Should they continue to be used?
That's the $64 million question. My own view is that I'll call it the chokehold, the assessment of whether a jailhouse informant should be called should be extremely tight, almost to the point of not calling any, because they are simply dangerous, they're inherently unreliable, but there might be just a sliver of jailhouse informants that are actually telling the truth, so I'm not sure that we can turn off the tap totally. It's important to look at the rest of the evidence and to see if there's anything that confirms what they're saying. If there's nothing to confirm what they're saying, I say they should not be called at all.
So you're saying in order to use a witness, a jailhouse informant, there must be some other corroborating evidence other than their testimony. First benchmark to pass.
Yes, if their alleged confession that they received stands alone and there's nothing to confirm the truth of what they're saying, and the rest of the case doesn't confirm it, in my view, it's far too dangerous to call that evidence, and the prosecution ought not to call it.
So you were involved in developing some more stringent guidelines for using jailhouse informants, and these guidelines were for Manitoba and Canada. One of the things you came up with that only one of these kinds of witnesses should be used in any particular case. There is a very high-profile case in New Zealand, the David Tamahere murder trial. There were 3 jailhouse informants used in that case. There's others where multiple jailhouse informants have been used. What do you think of that practice?
Well, I know one of the cases in Canada, I'll start with a Canadian example. In one of the cases in Canada, it was high profile, it was a terrible crime, and 11 jailhouse informants put up their hand and said, he confessed to me. And then the prosecution whittled it down to 3, one of whom had been previously convicted for perjury, and they were called. Public inquiry was called when it was found that the person was innocent, and the commissioner, who is a retired judge of the Supreme Court of Canada, made the recommendation that if you're going to call a jailhouse informant, call no more than 1, because they're inherently unreliable, and if you call 2 or 3, it sort of looks like inherently unreliable evidence is good evidence, and in fact it's not. So in my view, when we developed that policy, it was thought if the prosecution is going to call a jailhouse informant, it should be a maximum of 1, and the jury should focus on that individual alone and assess whether or not he or she is telling the truth. But it's unfair to the jury to call a bunch of them when they're all unreliable.
Here's the thing though, people would say that judges instruct juries all the time about making assessments around the reliability of witnesses. When these people give evidence, the jury knows they're in jail, so why can't they be relied on to make decisions around character? Jurors aren't dumb, are they?
No, they're not, and I do believe strongly in the jury system, but a high court judge in New Zealand a number of years ago in a report to government commented on that, and he said juries are good at many things, but in his view they're not well positioned to assess whether a jailhouse informant is telling the truth because they don't understand the environment in jail. Now, some might argue, well, that could come out in cross-examination. You can illustrate the circumstances in jail and the jail environment. But that was his view, and I'm inclined to agree with that. Jurors just, they understand daily things on the outside, but the tremendous pressure to get out is not fully understood by jurors, and they might listen to the jailhouse informant and say, well, what he says makes sense, when in fact he's lying.
In New Zealand recently, there was a prosecution taken against a jailhouse informant. It was a successful prosecution. The informant was convicted of a number of counts of perjury. That started as a private prosecution. So I notice in your guidelines, one of the guidelines is that informants found to have given false evidence should be, well, chased down and prosecuted. So the Crown in New Zealand has never prosecuted an informant for perjury. What do you make of that?
Well, I would say this, that often for a jailhouse informant who's convicted, let's say, of murder and is in jail for life, they have nothing to lose. They're in jail for life. So often they will say, well, I'm going to claim I got a confession. I didn't, but it might be my ticket out. And if they find that I'm lying, what can they do? So there has to be some consequence for them. And in jail, there's not too many consequences for lying. One of them is perjury, and even that, if you get a consecutive sentence for perjury and you're in for life, does that really act as a deterrent? So my view is that you have to pull out every stop you can think of to make it clear to the jailhouse informant that if they dare lie, there will be consequences for them. But it's a tough one. They don't face many consequences. There might be some jailhouse consequences in terms of going into segregation or something of that sort. But that has to be approved by correctional authorities who are not connected to the case.
So given that you think these are some of the most dangerous witnesses possible, jailhouse informants, we seem to be using them with greater regularity than perhaps in Canada. Do we need to adopt tighter rules around this?
Well, I would paint a bigger picture for you. Jailhouse informants were called in Canada. That's virtually completely dried up. Virtually no jailhouse informants are being called at all as a result of the policy that we developed in Canada, which says generally don't call them. In the United States, they continue to be called, but that's now drying up as well. A number of states in the U.S. are developing very strict guidelines in terms of when they can be called. So to get to your question, it seems to me that New Zealand has two main options. One is to develop prosecution guidelines that are very tough in terms of when they should be called, along the lines of the guidelines that you have in your hands, Lisa. Or the other option is for government to develop legislation for the same purpose, to define the circumstances in which a jailhouse informant should be called or could be called, and make those guidelines, or not guidelines, make the legislation very tough. But I think those are two viable options for New Zealand that would achieve the objective that I think is laudable.
So are we behind with this then? When you outline what Canada's doing and even the States, are we lagging?
Well, I never like to be critical of any country, but I would say this, that when Sir Thomas Thorpe, who was a former High Court judge and a Court of Appeal judge, when he did his report, he said, now he's a New Zealander, he said we're behind and Canada's way out in front, we should try to catch up. But that was 15 years ago. And as I say, I hate to be critical of another country, but I think it's important for New Zealand to start the discussion, to start the dialogue on this, and to realize the dangers posed by jailhouse informants. It's real and can easily lead to a miscarriage of justice.
Bruce, I just want to ask you one thing. The public register that you keep in Canada, which lists the jailhouse informants, what is the purpose of that? Is that so that you can see if an informant is regularly turning up or injecting themselves into criminal proceedings, or is it just an issue of basic transparency? It
was actually both. I wanted to make sure that the media would have access to it, that the public would have access to it, and Defence Counsel would have access to it. We wanted to signal that we're being totally transparent in this area, so anyone can get a hold of it. But as well, we thought that there should be a form of tracking of inmates that put up their hand and say someone confessed, because if they're doing that regularly, that in itself signals that there's a problem. And as Commissioner Corey said in one of the public inquiries in Canada, where the 11 people had put up their hands, he said one of them, who is one of the three that was called as a witness, to use Commissioner Corey's words, had claimed to receive more confessions than many dedicated priests. So I think that the public is entitled to know that, the jury is entitled to know that, and the public and Defence Counsel are entitled to know that someone is regularly claiming that they've received confessions, because that speaks volumes that they probably didn't.
And that was Bruce McFarlane QC, and he's speaking at a wrongful conviction seminar in Christchurch this Sunday. It's almost 23 after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A gun control advocate says the proposed new laws aren't up to scratch in dealing with improvised firearms. 2 people were killed in an anti-Semitic terror attack in Germany on Wednesday after the attacker used blueprints found online and a 3D printer to put the gun together. Harry Locke has this report.
Shortly after the attack, the International Centre for the Study of Radicalisation at King's College London uncovered details about the weapon online. It showed the firearm used in the attack was homemade, using a 3D printer with components made of plastic. But video footage of the attack shows the gun repeatedly jamming. Gun Control NZ co-founder Hira Cook says currently weapons created from 3D printers are not high quality.
At the moment, the guns aren't, as the man in Germany found, the guns are not very reliable. They do tend to jam, and they tend to fall apart quite quickly, even if they manage to fire bullets. They don't last very long.
That's the result of low-quality 3D printers that uses a fairly basic material. Added to that is the craftsmanship involved in making a good product, which requires a certain level of skill, as the director of Victoria University's School of Design, Ross Stevens, explains.
We call it digital craft, where, as I say, you have to do repetitious tests, you modify the CAD files fairly intensely, you print it out, you see how the printout compared to the CAD file. It would be quite difficult then to put a ballistics into it or some kind of explosive and test it, which I would assume people would start to notice if you were blowing up things in your bedroom.
But with Mr. Stevens acknowledging serious advancements in 3D technology could be just 5 to 10 years away, Wednesday's attack has raised questions about how to regulate such devices. Dr. Cook says the law needs to keep up with advancing technology.
They don't work very well, and the people using them risk injury to themselves. But in the future, they will improve. And at the moment, the new arms bill doesn't seem adequate. We need to have a system where all guns that are improvised or produced in any other way in New Zealand need to have a serial number and need to be registered according to the law.
But Nicole McKee, who is the spokesperson for the Council of Licensed Firearms Owners, says improvised guns are not an issue in New Zealand. She worries if 3D printers are included in gun control legislation, it could impact 3D printers with their alternative uses.
3D printing of firearms in New Zealand is not an issue, but 3D printers in New Zealand has been very helpful, especially in the medical profession. And we need to make sure that we can maintain balance and have effective legislation that helps New Zealand society not detract from some of the bonuses that we can get from modern equipment.
The police were not available for an interview today, but they provided a written statement saying,
"The police continue to monitor commentary and developments around 3D firearms. Anyone in New Zealand in possession of a firearm must have a valid firearms licence or endorsement, or be under the immediate supervision of a licence holder. Any person found in possession of a 3D printed firearm or manufactured firearm without a licence or appropriate endorsements could be prosecuted."
Ross Stevens says we may need to be more cautious in the future if 3D printing with metal becomes more affordable. Currently, a low-end 3D printer working with plastic costs about $1,000, whereas a machine using metal is worth more than $1 million. For Checkpoint, Harry Locke.
Hundreds of young people have swamped pop-up ballot boxes in Auckland to cast last-minute votes in local government elections. Organisers of a one-stop shop at Auckland University had to extend the ballot booths, putting up extra tables and petitions before polls close tomorrow. The city has by far the highest number of eligible voters, more than 1 million, but as of last night, only about 30% had cast a vote. Amy Williams reports.
So once you've finished your voting paper, you put it in the orange envelope. And this goes back into this white envelope. But we also
More than 50 one-stop shops have been held in the country's largest city since voting began to encourage more participation. Students queued between lectures at a pop-up ballot booth at Auckland University to cast last-minute votes. While many stood in line researching local candidates on their phones, others were there to vote only for the city's mayor.
We both asked our parents.
Yeah, I asked my dad who he voted for. Yeah, just get second opinions as well. I don't really want to vote for something I don't know anything about or know the people, so let's see if I make a decision by the end of the queue.
I mean, I'd seen a lot of billboards and whatnot around town, but I think I'll probably just vote for what I know. Who's already there.
I didn't get any papers and I wanted to vote, so I knew this was available, so I'm coming there. It's my plan B.
The one-stop shop was among the last 3 pop-up booths, with the last one at the Papa Toi Toi night markets tonight, to capture nearby South Auckland with its low turnout. At Auckland University, volunteers from the youth-led movement Rock and Roll offered the first 50 people to the booths free dumplings, giving away 300 morsels in an hour. Its project coordinator, Lucy McLean, says although voter turnout's been lower than previous years, she's encouraged by the number of people who voted today.
We are
just ecstatic about the turnout. So people have been kind of coming in droves, which is really exciting for us because it shows us that young people do really want to vote, but there's obviously a lot of barriers to getting their votes in.
Auckland Council GM of Democracy Services, Margaret Dalbay, says the popularity of the pop-up ballot boxes shows the voting system needs to change.
This is a system that is meant to be done by postal vote, so it's not as user-friendly. It hasn't been designed to be done like the general elections, and I think what it tells us is we're going to have to, throughout the country, have a good rethink about how we bring those elections to people to make it relevant and easy to vote.
Local Government New Zealand Principal Policy Advisor Mike Reid has been watching trends in local elections since 1998 and says he expects there'll be a last-minute rush. Dr Reid says national turnout is expected to track close to last year's 43%.
The interest of younger people seems much greater this time than we've seen in the past, both as people standing as candidates, so we're seeing younger candidates, and we're seeing sort of younger advocacy groups sort of arguing that councils need to be looking into addressing issues like climate change, and to a degree that perhaps we haven't seen in the past.
It's not too late to vote. Election organisers are encouraging people to get to a ballot box before noon tomorrow. For Checkpoint, Amy Williams.
And that's all we've got time for this evening. Have a wonderful weekend and we'll see you again on Monday.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Prefab homes could be produced en masse and help solve the housing crisis with proposed changes to building laws. A man facing 14 years behind bars for being a lookout in the violent robbery of Greylands Highlight Dairy last June has escaped a fixed jail term. As typhoon Hagibis bears down on Japan, bringing high winds and torrential rain tomorrow, locals and Rugby World Cup tourists are on edge. And a 50-year-old Kaiapoi man has been fined $1,250 for taking power from a protected area of the Kaikoura coast. Our next news and weather will be at 7 o'clock on RNZ National.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
And I've read the apology that Rebecca Kittredge has sent out. My view is it's not much of an apology.
Lately with me, Karen Hayes, your late-night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
What the Japanese agencies will do